Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. In this session, we're going to check out the Slate Digital FGX virtual mastering console dynamic. It's got a long name. Anyway, it's for mastering, and it's supposed to be mainly a dynamics module type situation here. So it doesn't include any EQ or anything like that. It's purely compression, limiting, some meters, and dither. It's generally used for mastering, even though it can be used on mixing. It's just that because of the subtle levels that this compressor does, a lot of people wouldn't generally use it for mixing, mainly mastering. So you can put it on your mix bus if you like, or technically you put it anywhere you like. As I said, there's no real rules around it, but it's because of the layout of it with a limiter and dither and stuff like that. It's generally targeted to be placed either on your mix bus at the end of the chain to do a quick master straight away, or in your full mastering session. So I use the compressor side of this plugin in most, if not all, of my mastering sessions. I don't generally use the other components, and that's because I use other features. Not that there's anything wrong with these components, and we'll run through the entire set here, and I'll show you all of the features in it, but I'll also show you how I sort of turn things off and just have the compressor itself running. So let's just get into it and check it out. All right, so here we have the interface. Now, as I said, normally I use this in my mastering sessions and not in my mixing sessions, but what I've done is I've just placed it on the mix bus here so that we can just do sort of a quick example of a mastering type session in this regard. I might just move the location down here a little bit. So here's the plugin itself, the layout of it. It's nice and clean, looks good, easy on the eyes. It's broken up into several modules. So we've got, and they've tried to present it as if it was a hardware device here. Obviously it's not, but we've got the top level here, which is sort of our main control, our settings, our presets. We can save presets. We've got some ABs and some more settings. Then this section here is our compressor. And as you can see, it's a subtle compressor. The highest it goes to is a 5-to-1. And generally I will sit around 2-to-1, or you can even go less if you'd like to. And even the meter itself does not really lead you to wanting to do maximum compression, because you're looking at -3 dB as the maximum on the meter. And generally I'm going to sit in this range here below -1, just to give that little bit of subtle compression in the mastering chain. And then next module here is basically, it's called level, but it's a limiter really, and that's what it is. So this is going to give us our increase in volume. And we've also got some dither and a ceiling setting here as well. We can turn that on or off. And then our last module here is our meters. So this is just going to give us a representation using a VU meter and a digital style meter here. We can have some different settings as well to get our levels right. So this is obviously targeted at us getting this to a mastering style volume. So I've got the mix turned down a bit at the moment and just got the vocals muted, just so we can just concentrate on the music, not distracted by vocals. And just got it down. I'll adjust that just to not blow out the video or anything like that. So with the plugin bypass, this is what we have. And then if we bring the plugin in its default state, this is what we get. So not really any change there, as you would hope. And the reason that there was no change with the bypass on bypass with everything down low is because this is a very clean processing unit. This is not really emulating any true hardware or anything like that. It's a very clean compressor limiter style thing. So when we just bring it in, it really has no impact on the audio at all. Or if it does, it's so small we don't even notice it. So as I said, we start from the top. We've got just some settings here for our presets. We can load presets that we want to, or we can save our own. Obviously, these are just the default presets that it comes with, and it's with Stephen Slate recommending some various settings. We're just going to play with it in default. Obviously, up, down, you can save your own. Again, we've got another settings here. So we've got some options here for our value display, how quickly it updates, how slowly it updates, how our mouse wheel works, sensitivity, user manual, etc. We can obviously A/B, so we can have two different settings and then just quickly flick between the two there. So if we turn off both of these modules here, so we turn off the meter, we turn off the level, all we have now is the compressor. This is what I generally do in my mastering sessions because I just like to use this compressor and not using their limiter. I have a different chain in my mastering sessions. But I like to use this clean compressor here just to do a very quick, a little bit of compression just to tame the mix a little bit and just get things under control. So we can change our meters from, obviously GR here is gain reduction. So this is going to show how much gain we're reducing when we start compressing. We can switch over to the out. So this will be the audio level of the signal going out, and obviously in as well, what the audio signal coming in it is. Generally, I'll leave it on gain reduction. So we've got a power button. We can turn it off or on. And we've got some settings here. So we can change our values. So these are the default settings, but we can obviously start modifying what things are displayed here. So as I said, we're targeting very low ratios, but in this regard here, you can see that we can start to push the ratio quite high if we want to change the settings. But in a mastering style, they leave it quite low because that's what they're trying to encourage you to do. Now, we could also reduce the threshold level, but it does default at 30. I don't find I go anywhere near that value. And our threshold maximum value, we can change there. And again, that's also changing this threshold here. So we'll go back to 0. We can also link the attack and release, which is these controls here. So if we link it, we get them moving together. If we don't, then they are separate. We can change the style of meter, what it looks like. We've got all various settings here. Matches output level, and however you want this display to look. So you can obviously increase the range. And what everything looks like there, you've got to sort of turn it on and off there because at the moment it's set to match. And we've got our gain reduction. So again, especially if we started changing the ratio and we want to start hitting things a lot harder, we can do that by changing our meters so that we can see those representations. We can change our needle velocity to be slower or fast if we want to see less movement in it and just get an average feel for it. But that's where it is in its default state. Then we have an attack and release. Okay, so obviously we've got, this is the fast side, slow side, and that's medium in the middle. And same with the release, fast and slow. Then we've got our ratio, which is 1:1, 1.2:1, 2:1, 3, 4, 5, and obviously we can change that with our settings control there. Then we have our threshold. So if you know anything about using a compressor, you know the basics of a compressor, then this is absolutely no different. We have attack, release, ratio, threshold. That's pretty much what most compressors have. All right, so let's just play some music and play with some of these settings here, because as I said, it works basically the same as any other compressor out there. So if you know how to use a compressor, you're pretty going to be right with this. It's just a very clean compressor here. So we'll just bring our ratio up 2:1. And I mainly use this compressor for sort of a gluing effect. As I said, it sort of brings everything in a little bit, tucks it in, controls some of the peaks, but it's not really doing a massive amount, especially not at these settings. So I was talking about gain reduction of -1. Now we could push it a lot harder. Just get the meter down here a little bit. I'm trying to exaggerate a little bit so it's a little bit more obvious, but you can hear it's very subtle, a very subtle compressor. It's hard to push it to levels where it's so obvious. I mean, obviously we could change the settings and go extreme, but I'm trying to keep it in the default settings as much as possible. But just so we can see the meter moving there. So that's a slow attack. Fast attack. So with a slow attack, slow release, the meter hardly moves. So even at these extreme settings, yes, the volume drops quite a lot, but it still doesn't sound like it's really over-compressed, which you'll get a lot with a lot of other compressors. So it's a very, very subtle sort of compressor there. All right, so let's move on to our meters and level. So again, we've got a settings control here where we can link the low punch and the detail, and we can change our level range to a lower value if we wish. That is the default. And on the other side here, we've got a dither on button and a dither and ceiling setting. So it's quite simple. So our dither is our output bit resolution. So depending on whether we're outputting as 16 bits or 24, normally if we're going to do a CD, we're going to bounce out at 16 bits. So that's why we'd leave the dither there. And we can set our ceiling to any level we want. Like default here is minus 0.1. So this is like if you're looking at a proper limiter, well, it is the ceiling. I mean, that's what it says here, ceiling. So it's the ceiling setting. So I would generally bring that down. That to me is too high. I think that there 0.3 is the highest I would go. But if you want to meet sort of iTunes, mastered for iTunes level, then you would even come down all the way down here to -1. But for this sake here, we'll just put it back to minus 0.3, 16-bit dither. And that's our setting, so we can obviously turn it on or off. So if we're not bouncing out and we're just using it for some other feature, not bouncing out to a 16-bit file or anything like that, and we don't need dither, then we can turn the dither off. Or if we wanted to use another dither plugin for some reason or something else that's going to generate dither later on in the process, then we can turn it off there, or we can turn it on. So you're not really going to hear the impact of that. So I'm going to, well, for instance, I'll just play it. But you're not going to hear. So I'm not going to go into the details of what dither is other than to say that it adds some noise at either a low or a high end of the frequency range that generally our hearing cannot hear. And that noise is there to, it's actually to get rid of any digital noise that would occur with a translation from say a 32 or 24-bit audio file to a 16-bit audio file. Because of the translation, you can start to get some digital noise, and they put dither on to do that. It's a very complicated process. Even I don't even really know how to explain it properly. I sort of understand the concept of it, but it's very hard to explain. Okay, so we have all the controls here are pretty self-explanatory. Okay, we've got a transient section. So generally when we do limiting of some form, there's usually a compromise. So when we start to crush something, or we start to push an audio signal against a wall, basically, something has to give. Okay, and a lot of the time what you'll lose is you'll lose possibly some of your low end, so your kick will be squashed down, or you may lose some of your higher end detail as well, and things like that. So Slate's decided to incorporate a control here so that you can try and add some of that back in and try and reduce the impact of the volume increase that you're doing from affecting the sound of your audio signal by giving you these two controls. And that's basically what these do. Okay, so this one here is going to add more of the low end, and this one's going to add more of the higher end elements. And as I said in here, you can even link them so they get moved together. They suggest that you don't touch these controls and leave them at 0 until you've got your other settings to where you want, and then play with them to see what you need to do with them, if anything at all. We have a big gain knob here, and this knob basically adds gain. So this is where we start to boost the level of our audio signal to get it to our mastering level. Then we have this dynamic perception knob here, which again, they suggest to leave it at 0 until you've got your levels all right, and then play with it after that. So this is supposed to add some more dynamic, or it's supposed to, as it says, dynamic perception. It's supposed to add more perceived dynamics to your mix. So it's not really adding more dynamics, but it's supposed to give the impression that you've got more dynamic range in your mix, and there's lots of more peaks and troughs type thing. And you've, because generally when we limit something and we push it against the brick wall again, we crush it. And what we're doing is we're reducing the dynamic range, and the song starts to sound squished. The lower components of your song start to come up and sound like they're closer to the same level as the louder parts. So this control here is supposed to allow you to get your increased volume, but also try to retain some of that dynamic range that you had before you started limiting your song. All right, and the ITP here, which stands for Intelligent Transient Preservation, and you've got obviously the middle adjustment, which is basically the default setting, and we can move it up to hard or smooth. I'm going to sort of read a bit from the manual here to explain this. And what they talk about is that it changes the global characteristics of the saturation curves. So when you raise the slider, the ITP processor uses more aggressive curves throughout the frequency spectrum, adding a slightly hard sound to the transients. The lower you push the slider, the gentler the saturation curves become, making the final master sound smoother. Okay, so it's playing with how it affects the transients and all that sort of stuff there. So, and it comes in regards in line with these as well. So we can get a sort of a harder sound or a smoother sound to it, or we can leave it in the middle and just leave it where it is. So they make some suggestions here that living in the middle leads to the most transparent results. For modern pop, rock, and metal, move the slider up is recommended for the most punch. And for big bassy R&B or hip hop, the middle or slightly lower settings can retain a lot of sub bass. So we'll see what that does there. We've got this great button here called constant gain monitoring. Okay, so this one here, we do suggest putting it in for a start. So what this does is it decreases the output of the processor by the same amount as you add via the gain knob. So this allows you to constantly compare the original versus the process before and after type thing. So the way you do it is that they suggest that you turn this on, get your level to where you want, and adjust these settings so you can hear before and after. So, bypass, unbypass. And then when you actually want to output, you need to turn this off, because otherwise you don't get the actual volume increase. So to give you an example of that, let's just actually play with these settings right now. So here's our mix here. You can see the sort of level we're coming out over here on the mix bus. And if we push this up, so you'll see here we really haven't, it has dropped in level, but that's mainly because I'm just crushing the heck out of this. But from an audible point of view, it hasn't really changed in volume too much. Okay, but if I just drop this down, so we're sitting around here. If I turn this constant gain off now, you'll hear it got louder, okay? So, as I said, the point of this is so it allows us to hear the before and after. To get a true representation of what this is doing and what we need to set it to. Now, what gain setting we put this to is going to obviously based on these meters here. So let's just quickly go through the meters and then we'll play with the rest of the settings here. All right, so we've got a few meters here on the digital side. So we've got peak and we've got left and right. So they're the two outer sides are the peak, and the two middle ones are your RMS. So depending on what you want to get out of this. Now, this plugin is getting a little bit on the dated side. And, you know, we're talking about RMS here instead of things like LUFS or anything like that. So it's not really something that I'm probably going to use for a mastering style meter, because it is so dated now and it is, you know, something that we don't use anymore. But there's various settings here, and we can change each of those under the settings here as well. So we've got settings 1, 2, and 3. So we can have some different values, and we can click between each one very quickly to see this different style of meter and the VU meter here. Now the VU meter here, as you see, it says RMS, is also a representation of this digital one, because sometimes I find it easy to look at a VU meter. But you can see here in the settings what we're looking at. So, you know, they've got a target reference RMS level of -10. How that translates to the the new ranges of LUFS and that, I'm not 100% sure. I've never actually looked into that, but I'm sure you could work it out if you load up another metering tool beside it, which we can do in a minute. We can turn on a few things here. There's various settings here. We can change the speed of how things are updated. I generally just leave most of this stuff to default. And obviously here, as I said, you've got 3 different settings that you can flick between here, and you can adjust each one of those to show you what you want. So in this case here, you've got the style, whether it's linear or log. You can set the minimum and maximum level. So -48, -4, and the range, -10 dB, +3 dB. And then your setting 2, we reduce the scale here, and we reduce some of these other settings, change a few things. And then our settings 3, again, it changes even some more settings. Right, so as I said, I don't usually change these settings, and to be honest with you, I don't even use this, but we'll show it being used here. So we're going to target -10. Now you can see here's -10 RMS here. So this is what they're suggesting we target. So all we do is turn our gain up, get it to our target, or get it around our target. We can reset them, try again if we went a bit hard. Okay, so let's say we go there. You'll see here the peak is sitting at -0.3. So we are slamming it against this limiter at -0.3, and that is because of this setting here, the ceiling. So right now we are hitting the peak up against this brick wall, basically. We are hitting the ceiling. All right, and that's because we increased this volume. When I didn't have the gain on, we're sitting down here. And the reason we're down here is because this is a mixing session and I usually mix lower. So we have peaks sitting here at -3.9. So we've got a bit of headroom there before we hit the ceiling, and -19 dB. So it depends how loud you mix at or how soft you mix at will change these values. But the main point is that we wanted to get an increase to get our mastering. So at the moment we've got the constant gain on, so you can hear before and after. And then we can start playing with the other settings. So we could say, all right, I want to try and control the dynamic range a bit. Now doing that has started to push it a bit too loud. So you can hear it brings up some of the other elements. It does sound a little bit more dynamic. Does it sound more natural? Thing is, we're not really squashing too much as it is anyway. We could go a lot harder and start squashing. So you can hear a big difference there, before and after. But then if we bring this in, the theory is that the impact between the before and after should be less noticeable. We should bring in the dynamic range there. So what about our transient section? Let's have a look at that. So you can obviously hear there the kick's now overloading. So if you found that you lost a little bit of kick, so if you listen to the, pay attention to the kick before and after. I'll just turn this up. It's before. That's after. So I hear a bit of a difference with the kick before and after, but even with this transient control here, even though it brings up the kick and tries to bring it out a bit more, it doesn't bring it out with the same sound. It still sounds different. So let's put that back down. Let's try the detail now. Bit subtler this one, but you can hear a little bit more top end coming out of it, but it is quite subtle. I think this dynamic perception has a bit more greater control over it. Now let's try this one here. Yeah, this sounds smoother. You listen to that snare drum. Yeah, so if you want to add a lot of punch, obviously push it up to the high. The medium was okay there. Obviously I'm pushing it a little bit too much here. I'm just trying to exaggerate a little bit. Turn the compressor off. Bypass it all together. So this is before, after. So you can hear it does change quite a bit. It is sort of contained a lot. It's squashed down a fair bit. Now, obviously, I've got the constant gain on still. So if we just bring this volume down, if we actually turn that off and I'll bypass the whole plugin, you'll hear the actual difference of what it's actually doing with volume and everything. So we're doing a lot of volume increasing there. So let's just, as an example, just to compare these meters just quickly, I'm just got a copy of levels here. Let's just see how it compares to that one. So it seems to be about a dB different almost, the LUFS. So that 10.5 is sitting at 9.5 here. So it compares pretty well, but it looks like it's maybe one difference there. So if you were targeting, say, a 10 LUFS, you're probably going to be looking at going about 11. And that's going to get you around your 10 LUFS, give or take. Obviously, there's different levels here. So depending on what your setting is in levels. So that's with levels, there's other meters as well, we could tell. But that's how you would translate it. But as I said, this meter here is really getting a little bit old. Everything else is now moving over to LUFS and dynamic range and things like that, whereas this is still talking about peak and RMS, which you can easily translate, as you could see. Once you get to know it, there's no big deal there. But it would be nice to see an update of this plugin with some more up-to-date meters and features and things like that. So there you go. There is the Slate Digital FG-X. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hopefully you liked it. Let me know if you use it or you have it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments there. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.